To make this bracelet, here are some of the materials you're going to want to have on hand. You have your metal clay supplies, materials needed for working the clay while wet, silicone molds, the materials you need for working the clay once it's dry, firing supplies, finishing supplies, materials needed for dressing up the clay once it's finished, and all the jewelry making supplies and tools that you need. These materials, as well as lots of other options, are available at firemountaingems.com. This bracelet combines a few elements to create this very unique design. From the beginning, we'll take some lump metal clay, roll it out, cut out an oval shape, and then we're going to let it dry in the dapping block. This will create a nice curve that fits really well on a wrist. And because there's different sizes, you can choose which one is more suitable to your wrist size. In addition to that base, we're going to place a key. And the key, we're just going to fill the key mold up with metal clay, and you can choose whichever key you like. That'll get added, as well as some words. And the words are created by rolling out the clay and stamping it using letter stamps. We'll also create a charm that we'll use to hang from the bracelet. We'll finish those pieces, get them fired, and then on that little charm we're going to add a little touch of gold just to make it even more special. And with that, we're going to roll out the clay. Rolling the clay out to a 4-card thickness or 1 millimeter, you could also work it into a 3-card thickness or 0.75 millimeters. And I'm looking for more of an oblong shape, so I'll start out with the clay in a rough form. And I'll just roll across the surface. And I need to extend the width on that a little bit, so I will now roll it in this direction. And one more time to get it nice and even all the way across. There we go. Move this to a non-stick Teflon sheet. And with the oval template, I'll choose which size template I like. We'll work with this one. And I find using the tip of a beading needle to be a nice, clean way to cut the clay around the template. You could also use the tip of a beading awl. This is just a little finer and it has a little less drag. Make sure it's cut free. Remove the template. Remove the excess clay. There we go. And then I will form holes that I'll use later, or that I'll enlarge later, but for now I want to get a hole to start with. And I am eyeballing it. You can certainly mark the hole placement, but because I know I'm going to make the holes larger, I'm not as concerned because I can even things out at that point. From here, we can shape the clay. And this I'll just place, I'm going to put it in, I'm going to go here. I want a nice curve, so I'll just place that into the dapping block and that'll create a nice curved surface. I want to make sure it's centered. There we are. Now, in addition to the dapping block, if you don't have one of these handy, you can use a light bulb as your form. I'll just show you how that works. You'll want to just put a light coating of a clay conditioner on there, and then just set the clay onto the light bulb, pressing it down so that it really takes that contour well. And then you just let it dry. Now sometimes it'll slide off the light bulb, so just make sure around here you have something to catch it so that when it hits the table it doesn't break. We'll set that aside to dry. And then once it's dry, you can hear that it's dry. It is ready for refining. And to refine, we will use the polishing papers. The surface should be very smooth because we did put it against a smooth surface to form it. But if for any reason you have any surface imperfections, this is the time to take care of that on both sides, the front and the back. And I'm starting with the highest grit polishing paper, and I'll work all the way through all of the progressions. And this will be where we will next enlarge the holes. You want to accommodate whatever stringing material is part of your design. So when you're planning the size hole you need, just keep that in mind. And these sanding sticks will help enlarge the clay. And then if you don't feel that they're making progress quickly enough, you can enlarge the hole as well as widen it in either direction to make it more of an oval. To complement the oval shape, you can use the jeweler's files. There's a few different shapes in the jeweler's file set that'll give you the ability to create almost any shape you want. Square, oval, triangle. So just work that until your piece looks something like that. You can see on both sides it's nice and neat. And by refining it at this point, even though we're still going to continue working on the clay, it just eliminates the need to go back to the bottom. We're just going to build and then only worry about cleaning up what we get on top of this layer. And the key is up next. The silicone mold has some really cool designs in it. I'm going to make use of this key, and I've added a little bit of clay conditioner to it to help with the releasing the clay. The silicone has a natural release ability, but I find that adding a little bit of the conditioner does help. I will press the clay into the mold. The key is keeping the clay in the mold since it doesn't want to stick. I'll roll across the surface just to help make sure I get all the details of the mold. Again, trying to make sure I don't pull it out so I don't duplicate and get a shift in my image. And then I'll take the key out of the mold. And between the silicone mold and the release material, the key comes right out. And I'll use the tip of a beading needle to cut away all of that material. Wrap it up and save it for later. And here is one that's already cut out and ready to be added to our base. I'll add a little bit of water to the base just to kind of get the clay ready. I have a general idea of which direction the key will go in, so I've only wetted the area that needs to be affected. And I will add paste down the center for the stem of the key and for the ring on the bottom, and then for a little bit that I know will be up here for the actual skeleton part of the key. There we go. So the paste will help because we're binding these together dry to wet clay. You need a little bit more than just water. And now I'll lift the key into place. There we go. Slide that into place. And I tend to use my tools more just because my fingers are so big, they get in the way and they inevitably damage something. All right. Make sure it's really into place. And then I'll press down. I'm not pressing too hard, but I definitely want to join those two materials together. And I want to make sure before I press too hard or get it completely into place that I've left the openings that we worked so hard to create. So I'll use the paintbrush to kind of help shift that a little bit. Do the same thing at the top of the key. There we go. All right, now I'll add another layer of water to really marry these two together. Okay, so it's ready to just be left alone for a little bit to dry. We'll come back when it's dry and we'll clean up some of those extra areas that need some attention. The base and the key are dry, and we can do a little touch-up. The area that needs to be cleaned up is minimal, because we really only worked in the spot where the key went down. But it certainly is a good measure to go in and use the polishing papers all the way through from the lowest to the highest grit, because as we build onto the bracelet, it'll be a lot harder to get into some of those lower recesses once we start adding more to it. So go through all the progression of those. Use any of the polishing supplies that you feel are going to help get into the areas where you feel it's needed. Then we can add our words. I'm using 2 card thickness. Place a small piece of clay. And I'm going for somewhat of a rectangular shape, so I'll start the clay out in a kind of a oblong shape. I'll transfer it to the Teflon sheet. And using the letter stamps, we'll spell out love. And the words that were added are done in a compact fashion, so you don't need to space the letters apart too much. There's L, O, V, and E. See if I get it right. There we go. Trim this to the size and shape that you would like. Cut away the excess. There we are. There's that. One last cut. Wrap up the excess. Save it for the next word. And then we'll transfer it to the base. Pick an area where we think it'll work. Add some water. Let's see, we'll tuck it in up under here. Have it go in line with the key. And again, I'm doing a wet to dry, so I'll add a little bit of paste. I don't want too much, but just enough. Kind of mix it in with the water that's there. Get things in a ready to receive motion. There we go. Transfer the word to the base. There we go. A little bit of water. Get a little bit of water on there, underneath. You can see how it kind of wicked across all by itself. So then you know it's underneath all the way across. Draw it in either side. Next we will add a couple of other words. And if you'd like, we can add a little bit more decorative detail using the syringe. And this for me was just a way of making it look like these were either wired in place or riveted in place. So really just a decorative touch to indicate a cold connection when in fact it really is already connected. Put a little dab. There we go. And then these are more like strings, like so. There we go. And then you can add a couple little ones up here. There. You can add more, we can refine those, and then we're going to make our life charm. very similar to creating the words for the bracelet, but we're going to roll out to a little bit thicker. You can use either 3 cards or 4 card thickness, which is either a 1 millimeter or 0.75 millimeter. And we're going for an oval shape. So starting the clay off in the shape you're going toward helps. But if you needed to, rotating the clay before you've reached the desired thickness also helps give you enough clay to work with to cut out your shape. Transfer the clay to the non-stick work surface. Okay. And using the oval template again and the beading needle, we will cut around the template to create the shape for our charm. And you can change the shape. I found the oval to just be complementary to the overall piece itself, but you can do a rectangle, which would match the words, or you can add a whole nother geometric shape. Go with square or round, really the choice is up to you. So we'll add the letters just like we did for the first word that we did, which was love. Now we'll do life. First we need to place a hole so we know where we're going to be suspending this from. And it doesn't have to be the complete hole right now, but at least something to be able to work with once it's dry. So we'll add the letters. There we go. And here, let me show you this. Instead of going in a straight line, kind of mix it up. Just so I can show you that you have a little bit of fun in the play with the letters as well. And then using, you can see some of that excess clay that I was brushing away, using a wet paintbrush, that'll help clean up that edge. There we go. And just like the base, once this is dry, we use the polishing papers to refine it and get it ready for putting into the kiln, which we'll address next. The pieces are ready for firing. I have a kiln shelf and I have a fiber blanket. I want to use fiber blanket because of the curve in the base of the bracelet. And to help with that, I need to break off a piece of the fiber blanket. So please, when you're doing that, wear a mask. And as soon as you're done with working with this and you get it into the kiln, wash your hands. Pinch off 2 little pieces or 1 if you make it so that it's big enough. And then place the base of the bracelet right on top of that little piece that you pinched off. And that'll help keep the curve that you worked so hard to achieve earlier in the process. If you didn't use this, it would likely flatten out. That's just the nature of gravity. So for the charm, that doesn't need any support, so you can put it flat onto the kiln shelf. If I had texture on the back, as well as the words on the front, I would also place that on the fiber blanket, as that would help protect it. These are going to go into the kiln and cool to room temperature. Once they're cool, you can touch this one as much as you'd like, but please do your best to not touch the charm because we're going to add gold, and it does not like the oil from our hands to be on the area where we're going to be applying the gold. Those are the only rules. We're going to fire this, and as soon as it's finished, we'll deal with the finishing process as well as adding the gold. Adding a touch of gold makes this silver really pop and sets it apart from the rest of the design. I have the piece. I haven't touched it, at least not a lot. The gold is ready and prepped. This particular brand comes powder, and then you just add glycerin to thin it so that it's in a paintable consistency. And this all comes together, so you don't have to worry about trying to find all the parts. It comes as a set. I have a dedicated paintbrush, and I use the awl to stir it. And I'll keep those tools separate only for gold use, just to not lose any of the material, as well as to not contaminate from one to the other. and I will paint on to the silver surface. And looks like we could probably thin it a little bit more, but you want a nice even coat. It can't be too thick. Each of the different golds come with instructions, and they give you really good guidelines on how thick to paint it on, as well as for all the firing that needs to happen. So this will be painted on, and I will go back and add another layer, and I'll keep working until it looks about like that, and then I'll put it in the kiln. And again, just check the manufacturer's instructions on how to fire it. They each have very specific guidelines for what works. And it's really very helpful because they are accurate instructions. Once it's fired, the piece will come out and it will look like that. We will refine or finish that piece. So I'll just move it to the block, and I'll use this to hold it so you can see. My fingers don't get in the way. And I'm just going to go against the surface using the wire brush. And you can see the gold start to come up. There we go. And then to bring up that shine even more, using an agate burnisher or the steel burnisher, you can work that surface. You see that gold really pops. If you decide that the gold layer is not sufficient to your liking, all is not lost. What you would do is put the piece back into the kiln, fire it, let it cool to room temperature, and just repeat the process. And here I'll show you the finished piece. This charm went through the process about 4 times before I was really pleased with the finish. So there's no harm in repeating it. I find adding the thinner layers and working up to this actually gives you a much better result. There's less flaking, there's less peeling off, and it gives you a really good bond between the two materials, the gold and the silver. To further finish the bracelet, we will do the wire brush on the silver onto that base. And I'll use the wire brush to get into the details, make sure the letters are burnished. That's the nice part about the wire brush because it's got all those fine bristles. There we go. There. You can keep working at that, do the back, do the sides, and then if you like, you can use a tumbler to reach that level of finish. Have fun exploring these techniques, coming up with the phrases that suit your design, and wear that in style.